Welcome to Media, Culture, and Why We Feel Like Crying So Much.
Each episode, we use media theory to make sense of our everyday media habits, practices, and experiences. I'm Stefanie Che.
I'm Grant Latanzi. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us. It is a thrill to have you here. We're very excited to have you as our second guest ever. I'm pleased to introduce you to the creator and co-host of Media, Culture, and Why I Feel Like Crying So Much, my colleague Stefanie Che. We met when we were master's students in the Georgetown Department of Communication, Culture, and Technology. Steph, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Kayla Wentzel, a PhD student in Communication, Information, and Media at Rutgers University, who holds a master's degree from the University of Delaware in Communication, and is also just really fun person to talk to. It's always great to have you in discussion. I feel like you have great thoughts and a good personality, good sense of humor, so we're excited to have you here today.
Thank you guys. I'm so excited to be here. This is so much fun for me. My first time being on a podcast as a guest. So,
Wow.
it's a pretty big deal for me here too.
Good, I'm glad. And this is a very, prestigious operation. We're talking
That's what I've heard.
dozens of listeners. Dozens.
Hello to all the fans out there.
I guess we usually like to start our episodes just talking about what's going on in the world. But I was kind of thinking, and I hate to put you on the spot like this, but I was thinking it might be good to start with you could tell us a little bit about what you research, what you're working on now, and I think that'll probably lead us into maybe the more conceptual discussion we want to have.
So, what I'm working on now is I actually just got my first publication, which is super exciting.
Hey, that's great.
About how authoritarianism and extroversion as a personality trait sort of relate to your inclination to censor and censorship. If you feel favorably for government censorship, if you feel sort of disfavorably for it, which was a project I did at Delaware, and it was just a class project. I wasn't super excited about it at the time, but because I kind of thought censorship was out the window, who censors really super much, and now I'm this is super relevant again. Thank gosh I looked at this, because censorship is becoming such a problem. So that was exciting. And then in terms of sort of more current research, I did a little bit more political science stuff at Delaware, and I'm moving a little bit more into culture and media at Rutgers. So currently I'm doing some projects about mental load. Think about more frequently managing relationships. They think about more frequently planning things, doctor's appointments, who's going to take out the trash, who did the dishes today. And they don't even have to be related to the home per se. They could just be in general. And so a lot of research has really talked about this in terms of mothers and people with children. But I really wanted to expand it into people without children, just women, and specifically sort of looking at it right now through the context of a workplace, what type of labor do single women in a workplace take on mentally that other people don't? So I'm sort of looking at it through that, and I'm also tracing it really through media and how it's kind of been just embedded in our culture, just based on what you've seen on constant sitcoms. Really is where I'm focusing, is on sitcoms. So I'm sort of starting through the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was kind of the first big example of a woman without a man in a workplace. And then sort of tracing that through to shows like 30 Rock, to shows like The Mindy Project. Mental load for single women has become so embedded in what we expect of women in the workplace and what we expect of just women in general in relationships. So that's sort of where I'm focusing right now. I'm also kind of really interested. I'm a research assistant on a project about Joan Gance Cooney, who was the Sesame Street creator. She's a woman who created Sesame Street. Sort of tracing her journey through that has been really cool. It wasn't something that sort of worked out with my advisor. It sort of fell into my lap, but I love the idea of uplifting a woman who I've never heard of before. I didn't even know Sesame Street was founded by a woman. So I really have been enjoying also just sort of tracing through her history and kind of making sure that she kind of gets the recognition that I think she really deserves out here. So it's been fun. I'm doing a lot more feminist stuff now, which is kind of my niche. And then I'm really hoping to expand that because, especially in the wake of the recent election, white women were a problem. I mean, they really did not show up in the ways that they should have. Should have, in my opinion. So sort of wanting to look through that and sort of what are the affordances of like why sort of white women in proximity to white men and power sort of kind of choose to kind of go against sort of a lot of feminist values sometimes. So those are sort of where I'm hoping to go and where I'm interested in right now.
That's very cool. The through line of feminism is pretty clear in your work, and so I'm excited to talk about that in a little bit. But I just wanted to point out the mental load thing and looking at sitcoms is fascinating because I'm thinking about the sitcom trope of like the clueless dad. Like I'm thinking about like Phil from Modern Family or like Homer
Right.
Simpson. Like it's like
Right.
the dad is sort of absolved of any sort of responsibility,
Responsibility. Yeah.
in terms of mental load because he's just a guy. Like he's just a
Yeah.
clueless guy. He just wants to hang out in the man cave.
And it's a punchline. It's not like a serious thing to talk about, it's just a punchline.
Yeah, but I think it's a strategically deployed one so that you don't notice the discrepant mental loads, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And then the woman is always so naggy, right? Like I was
Mhm.
thinking of like that 70s show and like, like Kitty is always like so annoying, right? She's always like crazy about stuff. And so they like represented such a negative way, right? So the man gets to sit around, drink beer and watch TV, and then the woman has to do everything. But at the same time, she's so annoying for it. She's just this naggy housewife. She's just like out of control. She doesn't really like, she doesn't see what other people are doing. She doesn't get it. Like she's always wanting things for herself. So yeah, it has such a really negative kind of connotation that comes with it, even though it's also something that that you have to do. They want you to do it. So yeah, that's sort of really where I'm interested in moving. And then especially just kind of even outside the context, like mothers obviously get it the worst. I mean, 1,000% mothers are the ones who end up taking a lot of it, but even just sort of in relationships for people without children. And they don't even necessarily have to be, I think, in a relationship. Daughters per se, like they don't have to be romantic. I think daughters get a lot of the hits for this kind of mental load stuff. And I think that I read something one time, and I don't know if it's super true anymore, but women who are single without children in a workplace that they are expected to pick up like extra committees, extra
Mm.
like activities and stuff like that because people are like, oh, well, you don't have kids, so you can do this. And I've definitely heard that like even just colloquially, like I feel like people in my life are like, oh, they don't have kids. I don't understand. Like they could do this if they wanted to. So just sort of this expectation that because you're childless, that you want to perform more labor for
Mm.
capitalism or you want to perform more labor for XYZ, whatever the relationship is. So,
Yeah, which as you're saying that, I think it's important to also emphasize that like housework and all other forms of unpaid work are also labor, and so
yeah,
like we need to consider them within that same frame that we think about like manufacturing material goods. Like like that sort of labor is the literal maintenance of life. Like that is how it is sustained. I'm
yeah,
thinking about like eldest daughter syndrome. So as you said, like it's not necessary that you one be a mother to experience this undue mental load. Like simply being a woman may also contribute. And so I think about like where did this trope of like the oldest daughter come from? And like I'm thinking, just it just seems very real. Like my mom is an oldest daughter. I'm watching her right now sort of take care of everything going on with my grandparents, and they're moving, and they also recently had like my grandpa had a major surgery, and she's coordinating doctor's appointments and getting quotes from movers. And like I was kind of telling my therapist about this, and she just goes, is she the oldest daughter? And I was like, oh yeah, she is. Like, I wasn't even thinking about how that could be relevant to this role she's ended up in.
100%. I mean, there's a lot I feel like that could be said about this whole eldest daughter syndrome. I notice it the most around Christmas time, when it's like
Mm.
who's getting the gifts, like who's buying the gifts for people. I have three sisters. I'm not the oldest, I'm the second oldest, but I still feel like we all sort of encapsulate this type of role because of I don't know. And it's just like this expectation on you as a daughter to take care of it and to be sort of in charge of it. And I notice that sometimes like there's weaponized incompetence out there from men. Like they're like, no, I don't know how to do that. And
I'm
I'm
just
like,
so
you
bad at
could do
cleaning the
Why
that.
don't you
sink. Like,
learn?
yeah,
Why can't
yeah,
you just learn? Why do I
exactly.
know this and you don't?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like even my dad the other day, love him, but the other day he was like, I want to order Indian food for dinner. And I was like, okay, great. I was driving home. I was like, this is what I want. If you could order that, that'd be great. I come home and he's like, oh, I don't know how the computer works. And I'm like, that is not true. You do know how the computer works. And he works in media. Like he knows how to order online. I'm like, this was weaponized incompetence used against me, Alan. And now I have to order the dinner because
Alan.
I wanted it. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely, it's perpetual and it's societal and it's something that they don't even notice. Like, my dad didn't even realize that he was just being annoying about it. Like he could have ordered dinner, but he just was like, whatever. She will order it when she gets home. And it's
Mhm.
true, I did. So it's just sort of this expectation of like, they'll pick up the slack. Someone else will pick
Yeah.
up this slack if I don't do it.
Can I throw something at you? Are you on TikTok?
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen all of the video? Not all, but the videos where people are posting like, "Oh, my husband at the doctor's and he doesn't know the answer to any of these questions about our kid," or like,
Yeah.
"Oh, like why am I the one who is getting the gifts or the dinner to go to your parents' house? Like these are your parents. Why am I doing this?" And just how in the comment section they'll kind of get like ripped up for it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I like and then sometimes the women will be like, "Oh, no, no, like I wasn't saying anything bad about my husband. I just wanted to like share this moment." And how that discourse ends up spinning from something that, oh, you had an inclination to share this moment. Maybe it was out of frustration or maybe it was out of like, oh, I've seen other people post this. My relationship is relatable in that way. And how that informs like other people and how like comment sections are on TikTok. And I was wondering if you had a thought about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. It all sort of, I wish I could explain. I wish I understood like the brainwashing is like a strong word, but there is such an indoctrination of domestic labor that like women feel the need to uphold for some reason. And so, and that could be societal. I mean, that's obviously institutionally based. That's obviously policy driven, but there is just this sort of real fear when that's threatened, when that becomes sort of something that somebody pushes back slightly against, like, hey, why doesn't he know the answer if our kid has gotten his allergy shots or whatever? Like, why doesn't he know that? Like, there's a real sort of pushback, I think, from women. It sort of threatens their place in some ways that maybe they feel comfortable in. Or,
Mm.
I mean, obviously, I understand why men would not want. I mean, men want you to know that. Why wouldn't they? It's a great deal for them. But for women, it's something that I don't fully understand. But I think, especially on TikTok, right? Like the rise of the trad wife and sort of this idea of like, this is your place. This is where you should be. Like, and this is what you should want to do. And I think it becomes sort of really embedded in that labor of love, right? And so something that Sylvia Federici talks about a lot is this sort of like, we obfuscate this labor of women in the house and we hide it and we make it invisible because we disguise it in, well, this is caretaking. This is love. Like, this is what you do if you love your husband. This is what you do if you love your children. And so because we put this like moral obligation of this aligns with how love is represented, then pushing back against it becomes like a threat to your relationship. Like, oh, you don't love your husband then. You must not love him. You must not love your kids. Like it becomes this real sort of danger to like how love is and how love should be expressed and what they expect you to do as someone who loves people. So yeah, I think that it becomes super hidden in this kind of idea of this is what love looks like and this is how it manifests in people and in heterosexual relationships specifically.
Yeah. I think to add onto that too, it naturalizes this. Is like women. This is what women do.
Yeah.
Is
Hmm.
the sort of next step, and it's like, yeah. So then it becomes like, notions of identity are wrapped up into it. And I want to think about too. I have some questions more specifically about when you first started engaging with these ideas of feminism and what we'll talk about standpoint theory, because
Hmm.
for me at least, going through primary education in a public school, the closest thing to social science that I got was like very scientific, pharmacologically minded psychology. Like there was no interpretive social science. And so I'm very curious to hear about when you first started engaging this idea. But one of the things I also want to throw out there, you mentioned like white women's role in the 2024 election. Like we obviously know white men's role voting for Trump, right? And so as a white man, obviously with very different views, I'm really trying to lean into like how I can be a role model for like young boys. And I just think it's important to also emphasize that like patriarchy hurts dudes too. It reduces men in being absolved of caring, which first of all, like, doesn't that feel like something's being taken away from you?
Right.
Your relationship with your children and helping them interface with society. But then in a very real sense, it reduces the man to like, oh, like I'm the money maker. Like my job is to engage in capitalist production of value, and I don't have to do shit developing my personal relationships, my intellect, or my personality outside that. And everyone's like, why are men lonely? Why do 1 in 4 young boys say they don't have a single friend? Like, well, gee, I wonder why when you're taught that you're supposed to engage as a worker and like anything else is secondary.
Yeah.
And so I want to throw that out there as we move into feminism, that like these ideas are truly for everybody. So I'm curious, if you want to respond to that, great. But I would love to just hear like, when did you first engage with feminism and standpoint theory, and like maybe like what do you remember about that time in your life?
Yeah. So also I think your point is excellent about patriarchy hurting men, and like, yeah, it totally contributes to the mental health crisis that men are undergoing because we're isolating them from caring and isolating them from like real meaningful relationships because that's not their job, that's not their role. So yes, I think that that's something that gets overlooked, and that's something that the Barbie movie totally represents. Always a stand for the Barbie movie that it hurts men too. Patriarchy is not just painful for women. So yes, I think that's a great point. In terms of when I started being into feminism, it's kind of a really interesting question. So I've always, I guess, been a little bit of a I always was outspoken, I would say, like in elementary school and all the time. I used to, like, one time specifically, the teacher was like, you have to do summer work, you have to do summer homework. And I told the whole class nobody has to do it. I said that they won't know if we don't do it. And if we band together and don't do the homework, they can't
Oh,
stop
I
us.
love this.
So I was leading a revolution about not doing the summer reading. The teacher called my mom crying because I upset
Oh
her
my
so
God.
much because I was like, no one's doing the homework. Let's not do it. So, that's probably the beginning, I would say, of my, like, my Marxist journey against the man. I was like, I will not do this homework. So I was sort of always raised like that. And my mom she has 4 daughters. She has a PhD. She's worked my entire life. So she has always emphasized to me being independent and never sort of, especially monetarily, relying on a man. She has always been like, you take care of yourself and you get yourself in and out of any situation that you have to. So that's probably like really where it started. Was I have a really strong mom. And so that's like definitely the lead in for me here. Feminism, I would say I went to a small white South Jersey public school, not talked about. Nobody wants to hear about that. So I would say in high school, I was a personal sort of feminist in the sense that like I was always being mean to men in ways that people think a classic feminist is, right? That you hate men. And I would say I kind of embodied that a little bit in the young parts of my life before I really understood what it was. And then sort of in college and specifically really in my master's program, I got really more into the study of feminism and understanding that perspective and sort of what that looks like instead of just being like mad at men all the time. Um, and so I have a really good friend. Her name is Alexis Crutchlow, and I'll shout her out. But she was so interested in mental age. She is 35. She doesn't have kids. She doesn't want kids. And it was something that really like weighed on her. My friend Alexis was really wondering why this pressure was placed on her so much. Why she has to be like, why people always want to know if she wanted to have kids, why it was significant to them. And that's really where she started talking about mental load. And that was kind of the first I actually got to be able to put like a word to it, right? Like I knew that this was something I did. This was something I carried. This was something I was like thinking about, but I never had like actually the terminology to encapsulate what that was and what that meant. Um, and then actually I didn't learn about feminist standpoint theory until this last year. I didn't actually know that there was like a real theoretical backing for why we should look into this, except for this year. So I would say it's kind of as feminism probably goes, right? Like people don't really want to tell you about it right away. It's not really something that's like indoctrinated in education. And so it like is kind of a long journey and a long road to get yourself to like where you feel like it makes sense for you. And there are lots of different extremes, I think, on the side of feminism, and that's what people really end up hating upon is like these extremes, like you shouldn't be in a relationship then with a man or like things like that. So I think that there are a lot of kind of pitfalls that people can like find to be daunting about feminism, and that's sort of why maybe people steer clear is because it does challenge a lot of assumptions, and then you sort of have to really make them work in terms of how you feel about things and how you feel about other people. So I would say it's been a kind of a longer journey and one that's I feel like really just starting for me, honestly, because um, I I haven't really gotten an opportunity to study it, I think, in the ways that I have really wanted to before. I've always been the person in class, my friends and I would have a joke at Delaware where we were like, every time they ask us a question, we'd always be like, well, it's because of the patriarchy and capitalism. And the professor would be like, okay, anything else? Like, but we were just like, it is like, these are the things that we should be like thinking about. So, I've always been just surrounded by really strong women and really strong people, who have really guided me in this sort of journey. And now I'm finally actually getting, I think, the real like, academic theoretical background to support the things that I've felt for a
Well, I
while.
think that really, really neatly. Sorry, Steph, did you have something?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just think that really neatly speaks to what standpoint theory is. Like it's sort of this idea that, well, I guess it's sort of in dialogue with the idea of hegemony, which is not we've talked about on this podcast, but is basically the idea that the different intersecting socially significant components of one's identity, like race, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, nationality, and so on, the further you get from the sort of dominant, most privileged group, that you gain different perspectives that privileged group is not able to see or understand or articulate. And I was thinking about as you were talking, like the problem. We read that one paper. It was the paper about the hermeneutical lacuna, about epistemic injustice.
Oh, yeah.
It was talking about how in the 70s, like sexual assault became an understood term that was referring to an understood type of encounter that people could have. And prior to that, there was not this language to like give name to one's experiences. And I feel like that's what you were kind of saying is like, I grew up, as a woman in America having these experiences, and now I'm at this. It's unfortunate, really, that you have to get to such a high level to be able to give language to that. But it sounds like that's that's sort of the process that you're describing, and I think that that's how we can kind of get into standpoint theory. I'm curious though, like, well, I don't know. Does that like, am I like getting at standpoint theory sort of is like as you understand it too? Because it sounds like we were sort of learning about it together.
Yeah, yeah. So from the way I understand it, and it's exactly like you said, is that it's like it is an emphasis on understanding your way of life from a situated perspective, from a knowledge that is specific. And it's also Marxian in nature, and it's sort of this idea of the marginalized among you have maybe the most objective standpoint. They maybe see the most, they maybe know the most because of sort of how things have impacted them. And I think we can speak to that in terms of Black women, queer women, especially things of that nature that like the most marginalized around you kind of have this better perspective of how oppression works, because they have been oppressed, and so it's hard to see from a position of power. That's sort of how I understand it, is that it's particularly giving space and rise to a marginalized perspective. And so there's standpoint theories in lots of different ways, but yeah, in terms of feminism specifically, emphasizing how it kind of looks from a female point of view. It does give rise to the type of language that I think many people have seen, but not really many people have ever heard of. And we can, I mean, that's definitely intentional in part because it keeps you kind of complacent if you don't have the language to describe it, it's harder for you to work against it because you don't even know the thing you're fighting against. So yeah, I think that the standpoint theory really draws from that idea that like coming from a marginalized perspective, that you have a better vantage point about what's going on than somebody from a moment of eliteness.
Yeah, yeah, very well put. So I guess I like, how can we, and this isn't just on you, Kayla, like we can put this in discussion, but like how are standpoint theory and feminism related? Like I think obviously thinking about marginalization on the basis of gender, like we can then there's a pretty obvious connection between those that are subjugated by basis of their sex and their gender, uh, are then in a certain standpoint in relation to that, as well as other parts of their identity. I think there's always this emphasis on intersectionality, that you can't really separate the experience of being like your experience of being a woman from your experience of being a white woman or a black woman,
Yeah.
etc. Like it is related to all other parts of who you are and how you experience. And then I also think thinking about standpoint of feminism specifically, like it emphasizes, and you spoke to this too, like the embodiedness of it, in that we read this wonderful paper by Donna Haraway, about how really, as you were saying, like the most objective knowledge is actually the most partial and incomplete and embodied. Like we're not trying, it's sort of like, the vision of like social science researchers is sort of like, we're going out and making like absolute knowledge, like I want to generalize across people and time and space and make like structural laws for how people work or whatever, whereas standpoint theory really pushes back and is like, that's a myth. Like that's what Haraway calls the myth of infinite vision. You think you can see everywhere from nowhere when really you're only able to see from your perspective.
Yeah, I think Donna Haraway's piece is perfect for this. And I guess I don't know per se, but I would, when I first encountered standpoint theory, it was like from a feminist perspective. And so I think that the first time I saw it was Nancy Hartsock in our media theory class last semester. So I don't know that I think that maybe perhaps that's its origin, is that and maybe I'm whitewashing. I have no idea, honestly. That was the first time I encountered it, was that it was standpoint theory was immediately in relation to feminism, that it wasn't something that came up sort of in separate views. It was really from a feminist perspective. And then, yeah, like you said about Donna Haraway's piece about the embodiment of it, is that like positioning is really what it's all about. And this idea that, I mean, you have to accept a couple claims, right? If you're interested in it, it comes with some assumptions, right? So one of the assumptions is that there is not an objective knowledge, that there is not an infinite knowledge. And that was something that I think like wrestles people the wrong way a little bit, because we really want to believe in the truth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so like I think that's an assumption that you have to kind of work within here, which is that you'll never have one objective knowledge about like a situation, about history, about whatever it is. I mean, obviously I think, as you get closer to the material, right? Like this is a table, right? This is a laptop. Like those things I think those are more sort of truth. But these sort of like bigger ideas, these are a little bit more abstract. Those are the things that, there is perhaps not one exact example and exact truth about those. So it comes with that assumption that you're okay with not believing in that. But at the same time, I think that's something that Donna Haraway explains really well, and something that really resonated with me is that it's also not to say that the whole world is constructed, right? Like there is some reality out there, right? And there's lots of perspective, and that's true, but there isn't only perspective, right? There is, on some level, on some basis, like there is something material, right? There is something that is there. And so it sort of exists between these two poles of like, yes, there's not objective truth, but also everything isn't fake and made up, you know? So it sort of, I think, is centered in between these sort of ideals. Um, and then, yeah, it really talks about like positionality. And the thing that I think people don't love about situated knowledges and about standpoint theory is that it cannot be fixed, right? People try to fix meanings on something. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, this idea of a situated knowledge means that none of this can be fixed. There is not one standpoint, even for women, even for people of color. Like, there is not one exact standpoint on all of these things. And so, in that, it resists being simplified. It won't. Feminist standpoints and any type of standpoint from a marginalized perspective can't be like honed down into one idea. And I think that that's something that people struggle with when you think about that in the beginning, is that
Yeah.
it's not something that's easily and like 100% you can just be like, oh, well, that's true about all women. We can call it a day, you know, and those things are, everyone likes those things. Those are comforting a little bit to have like these like general axioms of life and we can agree with these. And standpoint theory pushes back against that. It's an intervention towards those ideas of full objectivity and instead really shows that these are sort of vulnerable populations and that their perspective resists being simplified.
I have two questions for you.
Sure.
So, while you were talking, I was thinking about like identity politics, and right now I am rewatching Vanderpump Rules. Or actually, I'm watching it for the first time, but
Okay.
I just like started from the start, and now I'm on like the 2024 season. But in going through that all within like a few months, I got to see how language changed. I got to see how like culture changed, and around like the 2017 season there was more and more of like, as a white woman or as a cis white man, like they would start their takes and their opinions with that phrase.
Yeah.
And that's something that I just wanted to throw out and see like if you had a response to that. But then a second thing that I wanted to bring up was this idea that there is not one standpoint, and how I will just bring in my own experience for this. I posted a TikTok a few months ago, and I didn't start off with like, as an Asian eldest daughter, like I didn't do any of that. And people were in my comment section being like, she's like not our spokesperson, or like somebody else was like, yeah, like be our spokesperson. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what are we doing here? And I wanted to bring that into the conversation too, because especially with the platform like TikTok, where you're kind of just speaking from your lived experiences, speaking from your own, like, I bring in like academic research, I bring in lived experience into all my takes, but you can't just sit there for the first like 3 minutes and be like, here's like everywhere I'm coming from. But there were people in the comment section being like, yes, like this is our spokesperson. But then also people being like, just because she's Asian doesn't mean she can speak for us. And I was like, this isn't even the topic of our conversation right now. Like, what
Right.
is happening?
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's crazy that that sort of has happened in that way. In terms of Vanderpump Rules, I didn't even talk about this, but I'm also super interested in reality TV. I did a whole content analysis about The Bachelor, The Bachelorette. Like,
Love.
I think reality TV tells us a lot of things. I think that it is such a place of study. I can't even believe I forgot to mention it really in my intro because I am so interested in it. It has such a neoliberal agenda. If you really even think about it, like the state outsources its welfare onto reality TV, like those like home renovation shows when there's a natural disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, super interested in reality TV's place in all of this. I think probably largely, and I never watched Vanderpump Rules, so you can tell me if my take is like terrible, but my guess would be that like just because they preface it, and maybe that's a performative action from them
Yeah.
because of backlash they've received off of like social media and stuff.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I think that just because you preface something and you're like, hey, I'm speaking on behalf, like I'm a white cis woman, and so that's what I'm speaking on behalf of. Like, okay, it doesn't necessarily absolve you of whatever it is you're about to
Yeah.
say. Like, you can't just say whatever you want and then be like, well, it's just my experience. It's just coming from my perspective, you know, like
Right.
this is the way I've
That's
lived.
like a poor faith standpoint theory.
100%. So I would say that I don't know exactly how they're using it in that scenario. If they're using it to kind of like be like, they can't come at me because this is my experience, right? I think that
Yeah.
there can be some problems there if you get into like those ideas of like, well, that was my truth that happened. That was my truth. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, perhaps it was your truth, but at the same time, maybe it was not right. My guess would be that's just them covering themselves because of, like you said, the backlash that even you are getting on like TikTok about sort of sharing perspectives from your experiences. And I don't really know exactly the tendency for that. I'm a huge Hunger Games fan, and the new Haymitch book just came out. Okay. And
Yeah.
she read it in a day, cried, sobbed. I could
You
get
already
into
read
that.
it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
yeah.
I gotta read it. Don't, no spoilers, please.
No
Yeah.
spoilers, no spoilers. But Suzanne Collins, I think, is a genius. Anyways, and so she opens the book with a quote from David Hume, and it says something along the lines of like, why are the few so easily governed, or why are the many so easily governed by the few, or something along those lines. And I kind of feel like that idea of like you're the spokesperson comes from this like tendency to like pick a leader. And I don't really know, I can't really, I think, get into all of why that is. I'm not really sure if I even know it myself. Because that's a question that's like just been living rent free in my mind. Like, why do the few govern the many? Why do we let the few govern the many? Like, there's so many of us. Why do we let this happen? I don't know. And so I think that maybe that is reflecting of that tendency for the few to govern the many of like, this is our spokesperson. Like, this is going to be the person who speaks for us. And there's obviously like, you can't have everybody yelling at once. So that's like, it's logistically important to have somebody who represents you and who speaks for you in those types of settings. But even on TikTok, like, it's interesting that anyone who has a voice, everyone has an equal sort of, I mean, unless you buy followers or whatever, but like everyone kind of has an equal playing field. And yet people still are looking for somebody to say the thing that they're thinking, but they're not saying it themselves. So I don't really know exactly where that all comes from, but I imagine it has something to do with our tendency to like be willing to be kind of led by one who we think is like us, but maybe we're too scared or too whatever to speak for it ourselves.
That's so interesting that, like, so I immediately thought to like retweeting and reposting and how you don't even have to say anything yourself if you just repost it.
Yeah. And I'm a victim of that too. Like when I see somebody do something on like X or whatever that I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, I really like that. I'm like, oh, great. I don't make
Yeah.
any of my own content on like Twitter or TikTok. I just like repost other people's content. And part of that is obviously my laziness. I would say that I don't have a lot of time to make to do that. But at the same time, um, like there is something to be said about people explaining it in a way that was maybe better than I could have even done it myself. Like I do
Oh,
think that we want to use other people's voices who maybe are
yeah.
coming from an experience that I think is more apt to speak to whatever it is that I've been thinking, but maybe shouldn't say myself.
That's so interesting. Yeah, stuff I love. So I feel like a few threads that are coming up for me is like thinking about feminism and standpoint discourse in social media specifically. So Steph, thinking about your story or thinking about like retweeting, which that I like. It's interesting because your X account, if it's all retweets, is it still called a retweet? So stupid.
I have no
It's,
idea.
like whenever you're retweeting, it's sort of the assemblage on your profile becomes sort of like you are assembling a meaning that is sort of unique to like your perspective or like a message that you feel you want to amplify. But thinking about like standpoint and spokespeople, I feel like that's partly why. So I'm reading this book right now. Sorry. I'm reading this book right now, Meme Wars, by Joan Donovan, Emily Dreyfus, and Brian Friedberg. And it's from 2022, and this book is nutso. It's about like how all sorts of different right-leaning groups, from like libertarians to white supremacists and ethno-nationalists, have been using memes really since the early 2000s to indoctrinate people, to recruit people. And I feel like many of what they do, a lot of it is anti-black racism and a lot of it is anti-feminism. And so focusing on the anti-feminism part of it, as that's very relevant to our discussion, I think about like how on the internet anyone can and will be taken as a spokesperson, kind of as you were saying. Actually, not anyone, because if I were to go out there and make an opinion without it qualifying, like, I'm a straight white guy from Colorado, whatever, people would not presume. No one would say like he's not a spokesperson for us white dudes. Like there would be a very very limited amount of things that I would have to be talking about for people to think that way. Part of that is because like when your identity is part of the hegemonic group, like they become invisible. Like it's sort of like and that's a privilege, right? Like that's a sort of type of privilege, is this sort of like invisibility or defaultness of whiteness or manness. And so it's like, oh, like that's a default person, so they're not representing a group, when in reality you're always a part of your social identities, but part of it becomes obfuscated and masked by power, right? So thinking about like the pick a leader and like representative versus participatory, like what you were talking about, Kayla, just made me think about like the pitfalls of representative democracy as opposed to participatory democracy, where we elect people to the House, the Senate, and to all our other offices. And then there's not going to be like a memorandum where like we get to vote on the legislation they pass. Like they go do it, and we assume that they're representing us. And there's some problems with that idea. Like why? Because it situates many of us as like outside of governance and representation, and then it places the people that are spokespeople in a really, really important spot, especially on social media. Like one wrong slip of tongue and you've given the alt-right fuel to the fire to decontextualize and recontextualize what you're saying, and now, oh, you're like a social justice warrior, or like the term that, and this is a term that comes up in this book, is like feminazi, right? Like this idea of like feminism is all about being anti-man, when in reality it's like a nuanced understanding of power. Like, so I guess like I maybe to wrap up, because I know, Kayla, you're gonna have to head out in a bit. Like what, like thinking about social media discourse and feminism and the sort of like how it shows up in common discussion, which you've put in a lot of really interesting ways, Kayla, as we've been talking. If you could like send a push notification with advice about like everyday media life to everyone who's on their devices right now, it's a Monday morning, pretty much everyone in America, at least a lot of people are going to see it. What would you say? What would you want to broadcast? And why would that be?
So I would say really for me, I guess it would be to be mindful of what you consume. Okay, I guess that's my more leveled way of being like, don't trust everything that you see, is to be mindful of what you consume, because what you consume, what you take in, cultivates you, cultivates your
Mm-hmm.
belief, cultivates your attitudes, and impacts how you see the world. So being mindful of what you're consuming would be to me like seeking out different forms of perspective, seeking out, like we talked about standpoint theories, seeking out people who are speaking from a different perspective and sort of a more marginalized perspective, and being mindful and hearing what they have to say. So it's not my best push notification. Maybe it would just be go out and put down your phone and go outside for a walk or something
Yeah.
like that. Stop engaging. But if it feels like people, I wouldn't do that if I got a notification that was like, go for a walk. I'd be like, shut up, I'm not doing that. So I don't like being told what to do. So I would say be mindful of what you consume would be my push notification, which isn't
No,
great,
I
but
love
No,
that.
it's great.
it's what I
That's
have.
like something we say all the time, is like what you see is what there is. And it's frankly like
Yeah.
what you see out in the world is what the world becomes to you. And so you have to be really careful.
Yeah. So be careful out
Yeah.
there for all of you
Stay
listeners.
safe.
There are dangers out there.
Um, Kayla, this has been awesome. It's been so fun to have you on.
Yay. Thank you. I had a great time
Yeah, I
too.
mean, like we definitely, this does not have to be the end of your correspondence with us on the pod. We'd love to have you back. We'll send you clips and stuff if you want to put those on your socials or whatever. Like,
Awesome.
this is, oh, I can tell you later. But there's a book I think you would like, The Authenticity Industries by
Oh my
Michael
gosh.
Serrazio, and it's a
Is this because of our class?
this is actually I read this before we started school. So
Oh,
this
okay.
the book is about, it's like this, the subtitle is Keeping It Real in Media, Culture, and Politics, and it's like it looks at reality TV, influencers, and politicians as the like sort of three
Oh, I would
cases
love
of
that.
like how authenticity is manufactured and produced in these like media practices. I think you'd dig it.
Okay.
Do you
I'll
want
write
me to
that
bring
down.
this to you tonight?
Oh, sure.
But yeah, this
Thanks.
was
Thanks for
so
letting me
much
borrow
fun.
it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kayla.
Yay, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening.
Make sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to this podcast and follow us on Instagram at Media Culture and Why Pod, where you can share your thoughts, engage with us, and we'll keep you updated on new episodes.
And thanks to Eric McGowan, who made this episode audible and visible, and Torres is doing what we hate most and making sure people found out about our podcast on social media.
Join us next week, where we'll unpack another part of our media lives. Bye.